What is your most terrifying animal encounter? I'm from Florida and I was volunteering at a local nature conservancy. One of our tasks was to remove fallen logs that were blocking up a creek after a big storm. The creek was about chest deep, 15 feet wide, and opaque brown. As I'm moving logs, I notice a 12-foot alligator on the embankment I hadn't noticed before. It then slid into the creek I was in. I was with a land manager who was moving logs with me, and a herpetologist, who was in the canoe. I asked them what to do and they responded, well, those logs aren't gonna move themselves, and that gator's probably just trying to get away from us. Still, spending 30 minutes in a creek where you can't see anything, knowing there's an alligator lurking near your feet, moving logs which look like fucking alligators was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. I've been woken up by a bear sniffing my head once. I was cowboy camping, no tent, in Lil Canyon in Yosemite, when I hear something sniff right next to my head. My sleep-addled brain thinks it's a ranger on a horse telling me to move my camp. Had hiked about 20 miles that day. You have to be at least 4 miles into the canyon to camp, and I wasn't 100% sure I'd made it far enough since it was dark when I set up camp. Anyway, I say just 1 second. Sit up, grope for my flashlight and turn it on to see a black bear a couple feet away. I holler. He tears off. I get out and empty my bladder, and try to fall back asleep until I hear him coming around again. I make a bunch more noise. Decide I'm not getting any more sleep. Break camp and slowly night hike until the sun rises. When I was 12, a young stallion decided he wanted to play with me and almost killed me. He kicked and bit me and tried to trample me. He was my pet and was only treating me the way he'd treat a peer. I even knew that while it was happening. I made a huge mistake by turning my back on him while he was playful. He bit me and pulled me down. Knocked me down a couple of more times with a forefoot when I tried to get up. Reared up over me to stamp me a couple of times too. Still have the scar on my leg and that was a long time ago. Literally pissed myself during. My dad basically saved my life by chasing him off. His response was, "That was close. What did you learn?" At the time I was working until 1 AM so I wouldn't get home until 2 or so. I opened the door to the house and felt what I thought was a breeze come by my leg. I don't really pay attention. Walk over to my desk. Put my keys down and turn the light on. Right when I do so, there are 2 possums in the act of mating in the middle of my kitchen. They scream. I screamed and we began the 3-hour dance of getting them out of my house. I ended up trapping them in a dog cage and dumping them out in the middle of my backyard. When I was young, I went fishing with my dad and my best friend. We waded out through some deeper water to reach the shallow sandbar, where we fished for quite a while. The tide came in, and the water that had been just above my ankles was now above my waist. Suddenly a large shark, about 7-8 feet, crashed through a school of mullet only a few feet away from me. Dad saw it, my best friend saw it, and for a second we all 3 just kind of froze with our mouths hanging open. Quietly, calmly, Dad told us to walk back to shore, splashing as little as possible. We did, but the tide had come in, and I wasn't as tall as the other 2 guys. The deeper water between the sandbar and shore reached their chests, but I could hardly keep my head above water while my feet barely bounced along the bottom, and I struggled to hold my fishing rod up out of the water. I was completely helpless. While we knew that a hungry shark was swimming somewhere in the area, it felt like a scene out of a nightmare. Trying to run from an invisible monster, but my feet could barely touch the ground and I was hardly moving. I know, and even knew in that moment, that I had little chance of being eaten by a shark, especially one who is focused on fish. Still, if I ever were to be attacked, that was the moment, and I was utterly defenseless. A few years later, a man was killed just a few miles away when he jumped off his dock and into the path of a large bull shark that was chasing mullet. Once I tried to chase a possum off my lawn and it started chasing me back, so that was pretty startling. That other time me and a buddy were camping a little outside town and could hear coyotes howling from what sounded like all around us. I was very drunk at a wedding on a large property in rural New South Wales. I like to wander and explore when I drink. I was alone and suddenly confronted with a wombat. Wombats are massive balls of muscle. Being the drunk idiot I was all like, "Oh hello me wombat," and began to approach it. The wombat did not like this. It charged me. It was so fast. My heart stopped and I turned and ran as fast as I could. The little bugger nearly caught me. I sprinted back to the wedding in fear for my life. I got charged by a koala one time. It tried to climb me, then realized I wasn't a tree and became furious with me. It's amazing how fast it went from cute fuzzball to terrifying monster with death in its eyes. Growing up, my grandma babysat me. She lived with my uncle. He had a Rottweiler, who was very friendly. One day, when I was 9-10, I decided I wanted to pretend to be a wrestler. I did this by putting white masking tape on my hands and arms. I ended up fighting stuffed animals and all that. When I got tired, I just grabbed some action figures and went to the carport, which had deer stands. This was where the Rottweiler also slept, so the dog was asleep when I got there. I started playing with the toys. A few minutes later I heard the dog stirring. I pay no mind to it. I then hear growling. I turn around and the dog is growling at me. I try to let her know it is me, but she is still growling. I then slowly back away and she lunges at me. Being the somewhat smart kid I was, I noticed immediately she was going for my arms. I rip off the masking tape, throw it at the dog, and run back into the house. Avoided that dog for days until I was asked to feed her. She was friendly again. I walked past a very dark open doorway in a corner shop. A monstrous Rottweiler leapt out of the shadows, rearing up towards my neck. It got to about a foot away before its chain became taut and yanked it back. I said to the shopkeeper that she really needed to keep it on a shorter chain. The adrenaline was pumping away pretty hard for a while. I went in a week later and she said the dog had bitten someone in the face. She then complained about what I had said and told me I should have been more insistent about shortening the chain, trying to make out that the dog bite was my fault due to my sloppy advice. I never had to revisit that shop again, fortunately. I lived in an old farmhouse that was set on an overgrown market garden. The place was overrun by rats, but I never saw them. You could just hear them rustling in the walls. I didn't want to poison them because I was afraid that one would die in the walls and stink the place out. One night I went to bed and turned out the light. Immediately I realized I was thirsty and turned the light back on and stepped out to the kitchen. I interrupted a giant rat as he made his way across the kitchen floor. Obviously he had heard me go to bed and figured that I was down for the night and the coast was clear. I don't know who was more startled, him or me, but I'll never forget the look of malevolent intelligence in his eyes. We bolted in opposite directions. After that I set traps in the kitchen at night. When I was just 5 years old, my neighbor had a Doberman who was usually a very friendly dog. However, one day I go into his backyard to ride one of his bikes that he usually let me ride. As I was exiting the backyard, the Doberman jumped on me and knocked me to my butt and pinned me down, staring me in the face, growling viciously. Eventually when the neighbor comes out of the house and yelled at him, "Damien, get back in here." I don't know if that dog ever wanted to really kill me or just scare me. Went to war with a huntsman spider and a mucade centipede simultaneously in my shower in Japan. Yes, I was naked. Yes, I won. How do we know this isn't the spider or centipede talking? I was stationed in Japan for 3 out of the 6 years I was in the Navy. During that time I leased a Japanese house, and the shower was its own room. Full walk-in with a tub, bench, etc. So as the post says, I stumble into the shower one morning still half asleep, and out of my peripherals I see a black flash from behind me and hear a thud. Look into the tub and there is a huntsman spider the size of my hand staring back at me. Holy shit. My best guess is it was on the wall behind me and got scared when I walked in. So I go into attack mode immediately. Grab the shower head which was on a hose. Take aim looking to drown this thing in the tub drain. And as soon as I turned the water on, it jumped out of the tub onto the wall and ran into the windowsill. Tactic then became opening the window fast and pinching to death in the sill. As soon as I touched the glass, it jumped out onto the wall again and ran out the shower door. Now I'm cornered in the shower, peering out into the powder room to see the huntsman on the cabinet door waiting for me. Sneak to the front door of the house and grab a flip-flop. Come back to the powder room and wing the flip-flop at the spider. Hit it. Wound several of the legs. But do not kill it. It runs out of the bathroom and underneath the stairs. Much slower than it was moving prior. Feeling confident that spider is cornered under the stairs, I grab a can of bug spray and move in to finish it. Looking closely under the stairs, it was a hollow staircase where you could see through the gaps between steps. I see a black tail curled over the back lid of one of the stairs and assume it's the spider hiding on the back of the stair. Hit it with the spray. Enter fucking mucade centipede. It dropped off the back of the stair and started charging at me. I immediately peed a little. Front half of its body was up off the floor and its mouth was visibly biting. It backed me up all the way to the front door as I emptied the entire can of bug spray on it. By the time we got to the door, it was obviously overcome by the chemicals and just writhing around. So I grabbed the other flip-flop and smashed it. Didn't work. Hit it a few times and it would not die. So I turned the flip-flop on its edge and used it like a saw to cut the thing in half. Then remembered the spider. It was still under the stairs. So I blew under there and it ran out wounded and I smashed it with the flip-flop saw. Then I screamed at the top of my lungs for 30 seconds. The whole battle took probably 3 minutes but it felt like a fucking lifetime. I think being naked caused an adrenaline rush 1,000 times greater than if I were fully clothed. Weenie got to work. I was frazzled enough for my co-workers to notice. Can't tell if it was the worst morning of my life or my biggest triumph. But man won that day. As a kid, I spent a lot of time with my babysitter's kids at their house and they had a Sheltie dog. This is a smallish, friendly breed but my babysitter's son was a nightmare to it and would do shit like chase it around with a Nerf gun or tackle it and was basically just abusing this animal while his family did nothing. I was 7 and couldn't do much and to be honest the family had worse abuse going on than a kid terrorizing a dog. So I kept quiet about it. One day, a fly is just chilling over my head. Very clean household lol. And the dog starts growling at it and ends up mauling me to get to it. It ate part of my upper lip. I can't say 100% that it ate my lip but this dog's face was in my face and we never found the missing chunk of flesh it gouged out. So I always just say it bit me because that's the most sense I can make out of the blur of oh my god dog mouth and teeth and fur in my face. A triangular chunk of face and lip just gone. Worst part is I'm afraid of Shelties now, which is embarrassing. Second worst part is I kept hanging out with the babysitter's kids after they gave up the dog and like a year later they revealed they just gave it to their cousins. They revealed this by taking me to said cousin's house where the retrained dog was. This was top 10 anime betrayal level shit. A pack of swans was hunting poor little me when I was 9 years old. You don't F with swans. I outran a swarm of bees. I was young and in Australia, and we lived on the front of a farm. I went exploring a lot. It was really cool. I found a bee's nest in a huge fallen tree. I had watched a lot of cartoons, and wanted to know if the bees would come out in an arrow and get me if I whacked it with a stick. So I did. They did not. I was disappointed and climbed around the fallen tree. The bees do attack, just not immediately, and not in an arrow, in a cloud. Suddenly they were all around me. I sprinted home, about 2k. And if I slowed down the bees caught up. I ran into our yard and shut the gate, thinking I was safe. I wasn't, obviously, and got stung a few times. I deserved it though. Don't go beating up animal homes. I was solo hiking in the Porcupine Mountains in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan last autumn. Although I was by myself, there were plenty of other backpackers up there those couple of days. I ran across a bear print in the trail one morning. A few hours later I rounded a corner of the trail, and about 70 feet up ahead, I saw the hindquarters of an animal with dark brown fur about 2 feet high. I got a surge of adrenaline and everything started going in slow motion. I started to panic, and just as the poop was about to leave my butt, the animal lifted its head and it ended up being a black Labrador retriever. Right as I catch my breath, the dog's owner came rounding the corner from the opposite direction and sees me clutching my chest. I thought you were going to say the dog's owner came rounding the corner from the opposite direction, being chased by a grizzly. I was riding my bike around once when I see this big ass pit bull running straight at me. Luckily for me I was turning to go downhill and already in highest gear. But holy shit that pit bull could run. I must have been pulling 35 miles per hour on the bottom of that hill and that fucker was still right alongside me trying to bite my leg. Finally it gave up I guess and I didn't stop pedaling top speed until I was half a mile away. I have never pedaled a bike so hard in my life. Getting charged by a black bear. I was hunting elk and walking on an old 90-year-old railroad grade in some dense forest, and I see some movement in a tree. I get to looking, and it is 2 bear cubs. Oh shit. I look around and though a somewhat clear spot for the trees I see Mom, and she is headed right for me at this point. I was hunting with a fairly large rifle, a .375 H&H Magnum, so I decided to give her one warning shot, and if I had to shoot a second time it would be in self-defense. I put one round into the dirt in front of her, and thankfully she decided that the cannon that just fired at her was something she didn't want any part of, and she scrambled back and took off into the brush. I also noped the fuck out of there and didn't go that way the rest of the season. She can have that spot. I was about 3 or 4. My family owned chickens. One of the roosters was a dick. Every time we set foot in the yard, it would terrorize us with his large talons and try to peck us. It actually managed to claw my brother up. My dad finally killed that thing. It was the best meal I ever had. Now that I am an adult, I realize that I can kick the asshole roosters away like a football if they lunge at me. But as a 3-year-old, I had nightmares about it.